James Day, public television pioneer and chairman of the CUNY TV Advisory Board, passed away in April 2008. His legacy includes the series Day at Night, which aired for 130 episodes beginning in 1973. The program features interviews with many of the great thinkers and achievers of the 20th century. These 30-year-old programs have been restored. The interviews remain fresh and relevant today, exploring issues that are still important to society. Showing them again is CUNY TV's tribute to Jim and his contributions to public television.
Sam Levenson may be to Brooklyn what Mark Twain, in an earlier era, was to rural Missouri, a man who looks at life whole and with a smile of understanding. They call them humorists. Out of a boyhood in the urban jungle of New York City, and a dozen years as a high school teacher, Sam Levenson emerged upon the national consciousness as an entertainer unlike any other. A man who can be funny without telling jokes, who can be instructive without losing a laugh, and who seems possessed of an insight into the universal childhood experience that echoes a little of everyone's half-remembered past. For 25 years, he's tickled our ribs and teased our minds on television and nightclubs and on the lecture circuit, and between the covers of his 3 books, the latest of which is entitled In One Era and Out the Other. Sam, in all of the stories you've told over the years, there's a kind of underlying nostalgia, as though the days when we grew up were better than the days today. Were they really?
No, I don't think they were better. I think there was good in them.
They were as good?
No, there was good.
Oh, there was good. Oh.
There was good in them.
Yeah.
I don't believe that progress is made by waking up in the morning and say, I'm going to start a history today. There never was any, and I'm going to begin. You know, start drawing walls on the cave, you know, drawing pictures on the cave walls. We all have roots, see? And I'm aware of my roots. And I found that in my past there were things I didn't want to give up. They may change their form slightly. We may shorten them a little bit, but I don't want to give up, for example, if we can pick at random, the very concept of a more loving treatment of time itself.
What's a loving treatment of time?
A loving treatment of time is sitting still. I'm not going to become a quietist, and I'm not going to forget you and close my eyes. But I don't want to speed even this conversation up to the point where I cannot feel time in me as a living thing, you know, the bloodstream of life going through me. I found that Mama, with all her work, with all her doing many things, seemed to fill her life with things that took time, like the slow baking of a bread took time, and the slow singing of a lullaby took time, and the greeting of people and inviting people to stay, and the pressing of clothes and everything seemed to take time. But out of the time also came good side effects. If you iron slowly, then the room also became filled with the smell of the slow ironing. But if you put everything through a machine that goes brrr, there are no fallout that matters to me. See?
I wonder what filled the mind while that time was passing, because our minds are filled from the outside now, almost constantly, with radio, television, print. The mind almost never, in a city at least.
I think we are being corroded, polluted by fragments of things. I don't think real ideas are affecting us. You can be sitting in your room reading a book against the sound of the fire engines and the ambulances and the announcers and the clocks, and when you hear the time it will be exactly, and you're told the time must move. Clocks tick, they whir, they brr, they groan, they wake you, you see. Time, to my mother, was related to historic events. If you asked her, when did it happen, she would say, well, you know, you were born on the night the Titanic sank. Or if Uncle Louis had lived till next week, he would have been dead 40 years now, you know. Oh, how do you remember that night so well? How do I remember it? It was the night of Aunt Lena's wedding. Well, how do you remember that so well? Because I wasn't invited. That's how I remember so well. And it was tied in with living experience, a kind of existential thing. And it amazes me that with all the hard work, without getting out of the house, which Mama didn't, and Papa in the sweatshops, they could stop time in its tracks by saying it is the Sabbath. And everything better stop. And it did stop.
And you grew up in that
That's
environment, in spite of the fact you grew up in the fastest-paced city in the world, perhaps.
It was the fastest-paced city in the world. It's not as fast as it is now, because we don't have the courage now to say, whoop, hold it. While Pop, sweatshop slave, could come Friday night, wash up, clean up, and say, this time now I declare to be different from all other time. We are now no longer slaves. We are thinkers, right? We are spirits. We have souls, and everything will have to wait. That's what I meant by the good old days. You know, it's better to have a shot against pneumonia than to die of pneumonia. See, but it's also good to have a doctor who has time to make a house call.
Yes.
Because there too, time was of the essence. The doctor had time in my mother's house to sit and sample her chopped chicken livers before he went on to the next case, because this was part of us. He understood us and could treat us better, knowing how we lived, and the fact that he could share a cup of tea in our home. To me, that's dreadfully important.
Your parents were both immigrants, were they?
Immigrants from Russia to America.
As a matter of fact, you were born in Russia. There's been
Actually,
some confusion.
I came when I was about this big.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of your life has been lived
all
in New
I
York City.
ever remember is America. You know, America all my life. And not just a geographic America. When you get, sometimes I don't wait for the question, maybe I should wait for you to ask me the question.
Good.
But in the world in which patriotism now has so many meanings and so many questions attached to it, I think that the fathers and mothers who came from lands of tyranny, who had a background against which to evaluate opportunity and freedom, were great patriots. And while they did protest, and there were dissenters, and they did fight in this big city, there was much struggle against the sweatshops, and there were labor disputes, and there was much agony, yet the feeling that for us, you know, this was going to be the golden land, and this was going to be the golden opportunity. And Pop had great lines. You know, he had the Horatio Alger, so he had never heard of Horatio Alger, incidentally. I had to tell him who Horatio Alger was. Because this whole, what we call the Protestant ethic or the Puritan ethic to Papa was just the biblical ethic. You worked, because all men had to work. And you worked.
You said your father was permissive. He permitted you to work.
He permitted us to work, that's right. And he'd say things like, remember, my child, if you ever need a helping hand, you'll find one at the end of your arm, you know, that kind of thing. And the great American dream was never put better. When Papa said, if you want your dreams to come true, don't sleep. See? And this was the ethic. This was the ethic under which the children grew up.
And you were the youngest of 8?
10. They lost 2 before I arrived.
So did you have to work? With your father working as a wage earner?
My father was, in the books, what you call a wage earner. There was no wage, and he was no earner. You know, he worked.
Yes.
He worked, but he was not a good earner. And there again, what do I want to preserve from the old world and carry it with me to the new? His right to be Papa, to be the elder statesman, the philosopher, the head, the guru of this family, did not depend upon his ability to earn. It had nothing to do with it. He didn't have to deliver a car. He didn't have to deliver anything but himself as the spiritual head of this tribe. See? Now, you know, and if he didn't, Mama didn't say to the children, oh, how unfortunate, see, if your father were. No, this is Papa.
Did you feel any of that in your relations with other kids at that age, that you didn't have what they had, as kids do so often today?
You know, this is not the kind of thing that sociologists usually agree on. Maybe I'm not saying it correctly, but I was not a poor child. I just didn't have any money.
Yeah.
Which means that I didn't actually feel anguish, pain, deprivation. One of the reasons was because I never met a kid who was privileged. How could I tell I was under?
Yeah.
You know, we all had about the same. And the word ghetto was a word I never knew. You see, I'm sure others knew. I know the outside world looked over these walls and said, them, there they are, them, there. And I saw education as the doorways out, because that too was the ethic which said, you go to school, you sit, you learn, you behave. There were not too many choices. We have alternatives between, you know, even cottage cheese. You have 34 brands of cottage cheese. Why a man needs 34 brands of cottage cheese to choose from, I don't know. Or 111 types of bread. To us, when we said to God, thank God for our daily bread, I figured God knew what I was talking about. There was one God, and this was bread,
Yes.
see? But now you do it yourself. Step into any supermarket. You have long breads, you have yellow breads, you have Chinese breads, you have sticks, you have the macaroni sticks, long sticks, Italians. Then you have rich, re-enriched, de-enriched, re-enriched. And with the cottage cheese, you have 98% fat-free, 97% fat, 96% fat-free, re-enriched, re-enriched, new, improved. And all I knew was cheese, bread. It was simpler. It was simpler. But the time that I saved, see, this woman who is trying to make up her mind which of the 34 brands of cottage cheese she's going to buy has, theoretically, a thing called leisure to select some trivial item which consumes her whole day, while my mother already had the bread in the oven and bacon, and when you came home from school at 3 o'clock, it smelled like home. And Mama didn't have to take a spray gun and shoot around Adirondacks all over the house, because my mother didn't think Adirondacks was the greatest thing in the world. Bread was the greatest thing in the world. See, so why not bring the bread into the present? And
More is not always better.
No, oh, that I believe with all my, or larger or faster. I don't care how quickly it's done. One of my father's great struggles in this country was that he was a guild trained from the age of 4 to be a tailor, to stitch exquisitely, as though he was stitching for nobility. But there was no other way to do it. Workmanship, not only work, but workmanship. He came to America and they said, hey, get going, boy, get going, boy. He remained an angry man. They had taken away his pride and his workmanship. You know, it destroys him.
Productivity.
Destroys a man.
Sam, were you a good student when you were young?
No, I wasn't a good student. I don't know what happened to me, or perhaps I do. I wanted to be a violinist. That was the first dream. I had big dreams, and I had about 4 careers.
This, I suppose, was more or less accepted in the family, though, that you would go into some cultural pursuit, wasn't it?
That was, you know, our picture heroes on the wall were walls in poor homes. So that people forget that some of the very hard-earned pennies went to the buying of a Caruso record or a Misha Elman record. I knew names like Gali Cucci and Gili Martinelli when I was that high, see? Athletes, other heroes, what you call American heroes, to my Hebraic father were not really heroes. You see, so he plays ball, hoops. What has this got to do with anything, you know? If I ran up from the street and told my father, you know, that the Yankees are winning, he would simply say, is this good or bad for the Jews? See, he didn't know what the relationship was between being having a batting average and the survival of our people. See? Because our people are supposed to survive through culture. But I had books. We had books in the home. And if you studied the shelves in the home, you could see the direction that we were going and the direction America was going. From Papa's sacred books through, and I remember in my childhood, already on the shelves were Nietzsche and Edgar Allan Poe and Theodore Dreiser and Walt Whitman, and they went on, see? And you could see the direction. Papa had so much respect for the book, see, and the printed word, that he kind of didn't say no, although it was not sacred literature, yet reading was sacred. Study was sacred, see? And when you came home from school, he didn't ask the contemporary American question, like, were you happy in school today? That didn't concern Papa.
Happiness was of no consequence, huh?
You know, and I think that Papa had it right, and the founding fathers of this country also had it right, but we have misunderstood them. You know, they guaranteed the pursuit of happiness. We think they guaranteed the happiness. They guaranteed only the pursuit.
Yes.
You had to read it a little more slowly. Well, Papa also guaranteed the pursuit. You want to. Go look for it, you know, go find it. And the gold, the golden land, the gold was the opportunity. That was the gold. There was no gold you could touch, but the chance to do it. my brothers, older than myself, began to define freedom very early, and this is a very good definition. We kind of pieced it together. As Brother Joe, up number one in line, becomes a doctor, another one becomes a dentist, you know. Freedom was the opportunity to change the circumstances of our life through our own effort. This was the definition.
That's right.
You had to do it yourself.
What happened to your ambition to become a professional musician?
No talent, I guess. I played Mama's hard-earned pennies. I'm a product of some of the advantages of the underprivileged, which meant that I could go to the Settlement House, and this was on 105th Street and 3rd Avenue, which later became the Manhattan College of Music, and then they moved. For a quarter a lesson, I got violin lessons. And for $6, you could buy a violin, and there was no alternative. You see, culture was not optional. Culture was compulsory. And you had to play for Mama, play for Papa, and the Mama sang along, and the kids. So this day I keep a better rhythm if somebody is chopping fish. In another room, I get a much better rhythm, you know. I'm used to that, and so they're playing ball outside, those bums. Now, this is the important thing. So I stayed with it until about the Depression. When the Depression came, I said, what am I going to do with my ability? I was already a young man of college age, and I wasn't a great fiddle player. See? And great fiddle players said to me, not you, kid, you know, this is not for you. So I went on to college, see? And there I was influenced by a Professor Benardete at Brooklyn College, who was a superb teacher, whose name we revere, who interested us in Spanish and Hispanic culture. And that also...
Had you had no prior interest in Hispanic
No,
culture?
I found I was good in language.
Yeah.
You know, when I'd gone to the Hebrew school, I was good in that, and I wrote well, always good in spelling and English. And this was the good neighbor policy, remember? Yes. President Roosevelt. And I became aware of a culture down below us that had been belittled before. It's interesting. The Depression was on. We were all feeling a little bit of this hunger in the world, that there were a lot of hungry people in the world. And Benardete, Professor Jose Mayr Benardete, in addition to making us love culture, reminded us that there were hundreds of millions of Spanish-speaking people down below who had never come in this orbit of the French culture thing. French was elegant, you know? British was very elegant, but these people spoke Indian, and they spoke Indian dialects and Spanish. And they had suffered much, and at the best of times, before the Depression, they hadn't had a square meal, they'd gone hungry and suffered much. I became interested in Hispano-American literature and Cuban literature and Puerto Rican literature, and I took a master's at Columbia.
So was he who persuaded you to become a teacher of Spanish?
Yeah. And there are hundreds of us all over the world who are disciples of Jose Mayr Benardete, who should be, he should be somewhere between 75 and 80 now. And he ordered us. He was like Papa. He got us shoe boxes. Do we have time to tell you about the method? It's known as the organic method.
Organic.
The organic method. First of all, you went to Tom McCann or any, and you said, you got any empty boxes? This I could do from the old days. You know, we told even jokes about it. The only one on our block who didn't mind giving us empty boxes was the Undertaker. Everybody else was prepared to give you empty boxes. I suppose you're reading a novel. A novel has a hero, and their cousins, their uncle, their relatives. There are 30 kids in the class. He says, you got Uncle Jaime, you got Tante, Tia Teresa, you have this one. Each one is responsible for one character. You are to file a 4x6 card under the heading of, what does this man say about himself? What do others say about him? What does he say about others? See? And you file. He says about the moon, I think that there's a man on the moon. Uncle says, then you analyze this character in depth into the ground. And each one came with his shoebox, reported on his character. Then you put all of these together. And then he says, finally you'll know whether the man who wrote this book had genuine ideas or just notions. And you know, I read and I write to this day with the shoebox method, my own book, the new one in one ear and out the other. Hundreds of thousands of cards that I plowed through. The cards were on wedding customs. I learned at Columbia. I worked with Federico de Onis, who I think is gone now, who was a specialist in folklore, which meant that if I wanted to study customs, let's say ties, I would go down the street and say ties in windows. They are now a card is made out. Bow ties are in. This is the year so-and-so. More men are wearing bow ties. And you listed and cataloged ways of life. So that what I finally came up with was a very frank analysis of my life in my mother's and father's home, my life in my home with my children, and the new customs coming very rapidly toward us. The wedding in the park, the wedding in the grass. Won't you have a rabbi for your wedding, dear? Only if he has no religious hang-ups, you know? A new world comes in, and I'm cataloging that almost future shock kind of thing, thinking ahead. You know, a few years ago, we thought that the descent on the campus, and I recorded it very carefully, put it down. There were some very good jokes at the time that they had recalled the bulletin of Columbia University because somebody had allowed to slip through the statement, the library is a stone's throw from the dean's office. And I put that down in there. Now, look how the customs changed. That isn't even a good joke.
Did this card file become the basis for what you did as an entertainer later on? The insights you had into everyday, the familiar, the kind of things we all know?
I still do it. Believe me, after I leave you and I go home, I will have absorbed a certain amount of notes of what happened here. The very fact that you and I are working in a new medium, you know, that there are people watching, that is being taped and recorded, that a word can be bleeped. Now you say, put down the word bleep, you see, and let's go back a couple of thousand years. What did they bleep out of Socrates, you know? What did he say? Did anybody, and I'm sure somewhere some guy said, you'll never get away with this in Greece, you know? Take that out, see, or take out Socrates. See? So everything, there is nothing in our lives that is not a subject of humor, which makes humor a very serious matter.
Did you enjoy teaching? You taught for a dozen years and then left it for entertaining?
I enjoyed teaching as long as I was an authority figure up in front of the class. I wanted to be respected as a professional. I had trained for this.
And you had to establish that.
I wanted it to be known that I was an authority figure. This does not mean that I could not love the kids, that I could not be a friend of theirs and so on. But I felt the change coming again, folk ways change. The teacher is no longer the hero image. The rock and roll singer is a hero image, right? The television celebrity is the hero image. If it's my value against the value of the guy who's been on 3 years and he's a smash on TV, I guarantee you he's going to win the poll on any subject. What that man who's a celebrity on TV says about religion will count more than what I have to say. What he has to say about teaching is going to count more than what I have to say about teaching. Okay? So that I felt I was no longer a leader. I was now a follower or a second-rate hero image. And I didn't want to be that.
Is that likely to change, do you think, in our lifetime?
When we have piled up enough mediocrity, which we are piling up very quickly, heroes will come, you know. Giants out of the earth will come again who will stand up and say, nay, enough, like my father, it is the Sabbath. Stop, you know. And that, too, has brought me back to roots I never thought I would go back to. Because when I was in college and out, I figured that religion and philosophy and spirit were things for little old men to sit around and talk when they could do little else in life. But now I find that I have a very profound feeling of affinity and affiliation with Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos and Enoch and these wonderful men who stood up in the marketplace and said, a man's wealth is not to be measured by his possessions. What does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul? Ooh. And when I saw the Watergate investigation, I said, hey, I remember the guy who said, what doth it profit you to gain the whole world and lose your soul? And when the oil crisis came up, I remember, I think it's in Ecclesiastes, it says, the fruit of the earth is for all. See? Say, hey, these things have been said before. You know, I got some very ancient cousins, you know. So I want to take them along with me because I think my past has a great future.
Do you still find pleasure in music?
I play.
You do?
Yeah. I'm a second violinist. I think I was destined to be. We have a very nice group, quartets and quintets. We play piano and strings. And I went back. I had neglected it for years to be funny, see. At this point in my life, I am interested in humor, but I'm not as interested in funny.
is the distinction?
I think humor is compassionate, and funny doesn't have to be. There's a definition of wit, which says that wit is a guy who drives off a cliff, you know, with his mother-in-law in the car or something. I'm not saying it correctly. It'll come back. It doesn't care who gets killed, you see. But it's funny. At the moment, it was a very funny thing to do.
Yes.
See, but now I've come to the point where it's Old Testament's also St. Francis who says, peace begins, let it begin with me. If humor is, of its essence, a hostile activity, which could be.
It could be.
The answer is, does it have to be? If I say war is wrong, but inevitable, I say that's not the answer. War is wrong, period. It doesn't have to be inevitable. So I say humor does not have to be based upon man's inhumanity to man. And since I am in the humor business, I had better set the standard, because the words man's laughter, if talked too quickly, becomes manslaughter. And humor can become manslaughter.
And when humor is compassionate, I suppose it gives us a greater insight into ourselves and why we behave as we do.
I think there is some biblical saying, which is, when man is full of pity, he remembereth himself.
Sam, you've said, I'm not sure whether I got here too late for the old world or too soon for the new world. Yeah. Do you feel comfortable where you are? Between
I think
two worlds?
I'm not comfortable, but I'm also an optimist. When I said, you know, is it sunrise or sunset? I've wondered. I know it's sunrise. I know it's sunrise.
Why are you an optimist?
I'm an optimist because God was there before me, and I believe that I'm part of some eternal pattern, and when I'm not here anymore, the pattern will continue. And I believe that it is a good, ultimately a good pattern. We're being tested. God said to us, okay, I'll give you history. See what you can do with it. And we ruined it. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow it's not going to be better. It's got to be better.
The direction is the right direction.
We are moving in the right direction. And all hail to the young who ask for peace. This generation has made more of a fuss and done more to discredit war than any generation that ever lived before. I'm very proud of them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.